Thanks you at home as well for joining us this hour. It is now midnight on the East Coast. And congratulations, America. We have not defaulted on our national debt by the skin of our teeth. Starting right now, midnight, this was the moment when the U.S. Treasury said we would begin the risk of defaulting on our national debt if Congress didn't raise the debt ceiling. Well, with just over 90 minutes to spare, the House finally did vote to avoid that catastrophe. They voted to raise the debt ceiling and to end the government shutdown that had stretched into its 16th miserable day. The bill had passed the Senate earlier this evening by a vote of 81 to 18. The 18 no votes in the Senate were all Republican no votes. But all in all, most of the Senate Republicans voted in favor of ending the crisis. That was not true in the House. Here's what happened in the House. Democrats voted yes as a bloc. They were unanimous on the idea that the U.S. shouldn't default on our debt and the government should reopen. But most House Republicans, most of them by a mile, voted no on that. Most Republicans in the House wanted to blow past the debt ceiling and keep the shutdown going. They wanted that by almost 2-1. What this means is that House Speaker John Boehner passed this bill tonight without the support of his own members, his own Republican caucus. But thanks to all the Democrats and thanks to the minority of his caucus who did support him in this vote, we did finally bring about the end to this self-imposed national crisis tonight. President Obama is expected to sign the bill right away, as in basically now. After that, the federal government will begin the work of reopening itself after this long and painful shutdown. The Office of Management and Budget is advising federal employees to expect to return to work in the morning, as in Thursday morning, as in a few hours from now. President Obama spoke briefly tonight after the Senate vote. He said he intends to get going again on policy. He specifically mentioned immigration and also passing a farm bill, the kind of policymaking that has been shoved off the agenda in Washington while this crisis dragged on. Here's an interesting moment, though. As the president left the podium tonight, a reporter who I think was from CNN shouted out a question to him, even though he wasn't supposed to be taking questions. As the president finished his remarks and walked away from the podium, a reporter shouted out a question to him and asked him what happens when the debt ceiling comes up again in February. Watch what he says.
Mr. Govt, isn't this going to happen all over again in a few months?
No. No. The president says no. We are not doing this all over again in a few months. Is he right? Joining us now is Luke Russert, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent, whose whole professional life over 2 weeks now has revolved around this. In my mind, Luke, I am buying you a beer mentally right now to celebrate the end of this. Is that allowed?
I appreciate it. Right. Absolutely. Keep them coming.
So the president turned around and said tonight, no, we're not doing this again in a few months. Is there anything that changed tactically among Democrats or Republicans or in the balance of power that makes this less likely to happen again in 3 months?
Well, I think the just beatdown the GOP took at the polls it makes them less inclined to go on a strategy this abrasive the next time around. I don't think you'll see this sort of Cruz caucus hijack the plane. I mean, one GOP member said to me, which I thought was a perfect analogy, is these guys hijacked the plane, but they didn't have anyone who knew how to fly it. And that's actually what you saw play out over the course of the last few weeks. Interestingly enough, though, in sort of the perverse world in which we live here on Capitol Hill, after the GOP poll numbers have taken this huge hit, John Boehner passes a vote tonight with mainly Democratic votes. His standing as Speaker within the House GOP conference has ever been stronger. The conservatives love the fact that he rallied for them for the last 3 weeks. And maybe, Rachel, that gives them the political capital down the line not to have to bring the country through another ordeal such as this one, where $24 billion is wasted due to a shutdown and all the countless things that I think Chris was saying in the segue into your program of bad things that occurred. So that is one sort of takeaway. But I also think the Democratic strategy of not negotiating over what should be a routine matter normally throughout the history of the Republic, which is raising the debt limit, funding the government, that's a strategy where it paid dividends, and they'll continue to do that down the line. So I expect Joe Biden to be kept at Camp David on big-time negotiating weekends like he was the last few days, Rachel.
Look, on that issue about how how the right is handling Republican leadership now. You're right that we've seen all of these sort of insurgent Tea Party conservative Republicans who caused all of this hassle for John Boehner now saying, oh, we've never loved him more than we love him now.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've got the Tea Party Patriots and Club for Growth and Heritage Action to a certain extent and Freedom Works and guys like Eric Erickson from Red State and all of these people in the grassroots right and in the sort of astroturf right, all saying that this is an absolute caving, this is a disaster. Any Republican who went along with this is a horrible person. So how do you balance that outside right criticism of what Boehner did and the inside right praising of Boehner?
It's an odd economy, to be honest with you, Rachel, and no one should doubt the power of those outside groups. I mean, only yesterday you saw this bill on its way to the Rules Committee, or rather I should say the Boehner bill, the House option, and Heritage Action came out against it and they had to pull it. Now, they claim that wasn't just because of Heritage Action, they had their own internal faction disputes, but a lot of it has to do with the power of those outside groups. But the thing about those outside groups, Rachel, is that they don't necessarily know what exactly they want. I mean, look at what happened over the last 3 weeks. They had control, and then you had the CEO of Heritage Action saying yesterday, oh, well, we can't repeal Obamacare until we win the White House and the Senate, so that really can't happen until 2017. Well, then what were the last 3 weeks about? And I think that's where you kind of see this disconnect between the folks who are actually elected here on Capitol Hill, the outside groups, and so those conservatives that brought Boehner and brought the House GOP conference on this road, they don't really know what they want. But what they saw literally right before their eyes was their speaker stood tough, their speaker showed resolve, quote unquote, so they're happy to follow him into battle again, and I think more importantly to him, not try to make a run at his job through a coup anytime soon, and more likely than not, if he continues this up, save his job if he wants it again after 2014, but who knows if he wants that. Lastly, I'll just sort of say, from covering John Boehner closely, I think that this has bought him, at least internally, the capital if he wants to do the grand bargain, which who knows if he still wants to do it. I think deep down he does for his own posterity and for his own legacy. He has some of the capital to do that further down the line. But as far as us seeing a real revenue increases in exchange for entitlement cuts, could that happen come January, this close to what just occurred over the last few weeks? I'm not so sure.
It is an amazing story that what might come out of here is John Boehner looking better. It's just amazing.
It's literally only in America.
Yeah,
it's
seriously.
remarkable.
In a very small
in a post-Citizens
sliver.
United America. It's
That's
amazing.
right. Luke Russert, NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent. Luke, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, especially
Thanks
so
a lot.
late.
Take care.
Thank
Be well.
You. All right. So the Republicans in the House hatched a plan to get here, right? I mean, they had voted 30, 40, okay, more than 40 times to repeal the health reform law, to repeal Obamacare. But it had never mattered. They kept voting over and over and over again, dozens of times, to repeal Obamacare, but everybody ignored them. All of those votes, more than 40 votes, had no practical effect at all. So then they hatched a plan. They were going to make themselves matter. Marlon Stutzman, please explain the plan.
I believe that this is our time. This is when it really matters. Yes, we voted to repeal Obamacare 30 to 40 times, but this is when it really counts. This is when it's time to put up or shut up.
Yeah, we did this 30 or 40 times already, but those other 30 or 40 times that we did this, forget this. This time, their new plan, they figured out a way to make it count. They figured out a way to not be ignored anymore. And that's how we got into the mess that we just resolved tonight. The House Republican plan was that they would refuse to fund anything. They would refuse to fund the entire government unless the Democrats caved and finally let them kill Obamacare. That was their big plan, their brilliant plan. They thought that would work. The Democrats, they thought, would never let the government be shut down, so they would demand that the only way the Democrats could avoid that would be to kill Obamacare. Republicans thought they'd finally get their way. That was their plan. That's what they told themselves would work. Democrats said no to that plan right off the bat. Republicans thought for sure Democrats would have to cave on this, especially when they folded in the debt ceiling, too. But the Democrats said no. And so 16 days ago, the government did, in fact, shut down. And maybe the Republicans did not expect the government to actually shut down. Maybe they didn't expect Democrats to say no to them at that point. Because once we got the shutdown, Republicans did not seem to have a plan for what to do next. Or it at least was a hitch in their plan that they had the shutdown, but Democrats had not agreed to repeal Obamacare. So now that you got the shutdown, now what? That is when their demand list started changing. So after their initial failure, they said, repeal Obamacare, and the Democrats said no. After their initial failure, they've got the shutdown. Then the Republicans' efforts to force the Democrats into giving them something in exchange for holding the country hostage, they went something like this. They said, okay, we can't get a repeal of Obamacare. Can we get a defunding of Obamacare? Democrats said no. Okay. Can we get Obamacare delayed? No. Can we delay the specific individual mandates in Obamacare? No. They wanted to keep it on Obamacare, but they're sort of running out of the Obamacare idea, at least for demands. Until David Vitter, yes, that David Vitter, the hooker guy, came up with a whole new list of weird demands specifically about Obamacare. So then they had a new lease on life. Can we deny health insurance coverage specifically to the president himself and the vice president? That was actually one of their demands. Answer, no. Can we mess with the health insurance of the people who work for members of Congress? Congressional staffers, can we mess with them? Democrats said no. Can we mess with the health insurance specifically of members of the president's cabinet? That's what we want in exchange for reopening the government. No. Okay. Then they said maybe we could make it so birth control is not covered by people's health insurance anymore. Anybody? Can we have that? No. How about the Keystone Pipeline they tried? Can we force the Keystone Pipeline to be open by doing this? No. Means testing Medicare? No. Changing the pensions of federal employees? No. Expanded oil drilling. Please, can we have expanded oil drilling? Then we'll open the government. Democrats said no. Stuff it. Net neutrality? Nope. Tort reform? Nope. The EPA's pollution rules for new coal-fired power plants. We demand you repeal those or we won't open the... No, Democrats said no. Democrats, I said no. Then Paul Ryan piped up. Remember Paul Ryan's op-ed? Paul Ryan popped up and said, how about my tax code changes? From when I ran for vice president and we lost so badly. Can I have those tax code changes now? Democrats said no. Then the Republicans demanded that the administration get rid of coal ash regulations. Democrats said no. Then they demanded to change the tax on medical devices. The tax on medical devices, which Evan Bayh is the lobbyist for. Sorry, no. Can we change the Treasury Department's rules so that the next debt ceiling crisis we have is even worse than this one because the Treasury has no flexibility to move the money around? That's what we want. No. All right, well, here's one. Can we get guarantees of income verification for certain low-income people who will get subsidies for their health insurance under Obamacare? Yes. Yes, you can have that one. Keep that one here. You can have that one because that is already in the Obamacare law. It's already the law, so yes, you can have it. You can also have the right to bestow the name Thursday on the day that comes after Wednesday, if you like, since it's already going to be called Thursday no matter what you demand. The income verification thing that they won is already in Obamacare. So yes, you can have that. You enjoy that. But of all the other long, arcane, improvised, constantly changing list of demands that the Republicans have come up with on their long, weird, ever-changing ransom note that they kept writing and rewriting once they found out that they had shut down the government for some reason, but they didn't exactly remember why and they didn't have any demands handy. Of the entire list of things that they demanded in exchange for reopening the government, which I just listed here, all of which they put forward as demands, we now know as of tonight that of their entire list of all the different things they tried demanding, they are getting nothing. 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 You can argue for what you want through the legislative process by trying to make legislation and amend bills and win votes. You can try to win what you want in terms of policy by winning elections. But when you lose policy fights and you lose elections, the line was drawn here tonight to say there isn't a third way. There's not another means of policy making available to you. If you lose elections and you lose the policy fight, you can't just do it a third way. You can't just say, I'm going to destroy things unless I get my way. If you try to do it that way, you will find that what you get off your list of demands is nothing. Actually, there is one thing that they did get out of this disaster, I should say, to be fair. Before the crisis started, the Democrats have been asking for 6 months for negotiations between the two houses of Congress and the two parties to talk big picture about the budget, to try to avoid this lurching from crisis to crisis we've been going through since Republicans got control of the House. Democrats have been asking for that since April. They have asked for that by their own count 21 separate times. Republicans have been saying no over and over and over again. Republicans have refused to participate in that process. Well, now, as part of this deal struck tonight to reopen the government, the Republicans have agreed. They will now do that negotiation thing the Democrats have been asking for 6 months, that the Republicans were refusing all this time. Now they'll give in on that. So to summarize, through this process, Republicans said they would shut down the government, or once it was shut down, they would refuse to open the government unless they got each one of these things. Of all of these things that they demanded, they got none of them. None. The Democrats had suggested before this whole process that they would please like to talk about the budget, and now Republicans will go along with that. So on the evening of day 16 of the government shutdown, just hours from the moment when the Treasury Department said we would hit the debt ceiling and start to be unable to pay what we owe, the Senate once again passed a bill to reopen the government and raise the debt ceiling. All along, John Boehner had refused to allow a vote on that because, although it would probably have passed, most Republicans didn't like the idea. Republicans wanted to keep adding more ransom demands, none of which they got. But finally, Wednesday night, tonight, John Boehner said he would allow a vote that would open the government and raise the debt ceiling. Tonight, he finally did it. The White House had insisted throughout this process that there are no winners, that nobody is coming out on top. And it may be true that nobody wins here. But somebody definitely lost here. And the story of John Boehner leading the House Republicans since they got control of Congress in 2011 is a remarkable story of failure. Under his speakership, we've now had 2 near defaults, 2 brushes up against the debt ceiling. We've had 1 long government shutdown. We've also had no legislation of any significance at all since he has been speaker. He's even been unable to roll back any legislative accomplishments of the Democrats in that time. And the means by which John Boehner has failed over the past 3 years, they have been public, they've been careening, they've all been happening out in the open. We ought to be able to predict them at this point, but it's always still shocking when it happens. I mean, John Boehner had a Republican farm bill that his own side killed. John Boehner had a Republican transportation bill that his own side killed. John Boehner had a Republican housing bill that his own side killed. John Boehner had Republican plans for the fiscal cliff fight and the first debt ceiling and the payroll tax extension. John Boehner even had a House Republican leadership version of a health care bill. He put all of those things out there publicly. Here's what I, as leader of the Republican Party, say we are going to do. And then he looked behind them for his members, and the rest of the Republicans said, no, John, we're not doing it. And so then it's like, okay, well, never mind. John Boehner's tenure as Speaker of the House since Republicans took control of Congress in January 2011 has really only succeeded in accomplishing one thing, which is that John Boehner is still the Speaker of the House. He has not lost that job. And maybe that is because nobody else wants it. John Boehner is still there, which is amazing, given the abject depth of the failures of his speakership. These have been 16 bad days for the country and the economy. And how close we got to the debt ceiling may be too close. That may also have significant economic consequences for us as a country beyond what we suffered in the shutdown. The country suffered for this failure. But this failure, Republican failure in Congress, is bottomless at this point. It is epic. And now Congress has taken this last vote. And after taking this last vote, they go away for a week, presumably to lick their wounds and figure out who they're going to blame. But then they have to come back and take up the job again of trying to keep the government open and not hit the debt ceiling again when it comes around in February. Now they have to get back to supposedly running the country. What changes in Congress because of this journey that we have been on through the bottomlands? Because surely we cannot stay here. Surely everybody acknowledges we cannot stay where we are.